Welcome back to America's Forum. I'm J.D. Hayworth.
And I'm John Bachman. J.D., obviously the Fort Hood shooting is very important here, but it has also sort of masked somewhat the magnitude of this Supreme Court ruling yesterday. Would you agree?
Well, I think whenever you have something as shocking as Fort Hood, obviously that goes to the top of the agenda and will remain there. But it is worth keeping an eye on what is transpiring in terms of campaign finance, or, as I would like to put it, in terms of the rightful restoration of First Amendment rights.
And that's why we're going to take a closer look here at that story. Yesterday, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the limit on campaign contributions to candidates and parties in federal elections. The 5-4 decision was along party lines, with the 5 justices appointed by Republican presidents joining the majority, with the 4 others appointed by Democrats representing the dissenting opinion. Chief Justice John Roberts said that the overall limits could not survive First Amendment scrutiny. Quote, "There is no right in our democracy more basic than the right to participate in electing our political leaders." While Justice Stephen Breyer remarked that if the court in Citizen United opened a door, today's decision may have well opened up a floodgate.
Well, perspective on this nationwide, but let's go all the way out west. We are joined by our man on the West Coast for Newsmax, James Hirsen. James, welcome back to America's Forum.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
We're doing fine, James, and we're talking about First Amendment rights. Obviously, Hollywood is quick to shout that in terms of creative license, if you will. But now, when it comes to political donations and the so-called reforms proffered by so many on the left, where does political Hollywood stand on this decision from the Supreme Court?
Well, there hasn't been really any of the usual hand-wringing that you hear from leftists over campaign finance reform. What we always hear from them is that when these kinds of restrictions are struck down, it gives more power to the wealthy. But we got to remember, in Hollywood, Hollywood has its share of lefty billionaires. Hollywood packs these fundraisers with the maximum contribution amounts. They had the biggest fundraiser for President Obama's reelection in the history of politics, with George Clooney raising $15 million in one night. So I think the Democrats are looking and saying, well, you know what, maybe with this upcoming midterm election, now more congressional candidates from across the country can make the migration to Hollywood with their hat in hand and get more checks, because they're, just for an example, the DreamWorks billionaires, David Geffen, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and Steven Spielberg, they all have political consultants and give tons of money to Democrats almost exclusively. So I think when you think of those three, you think of George Soros, you think of Bill Gates, we could go on and on. The amount of well-heeled fat cat donors that now Democrats can take advantage of are significant. So that's what's, if anything, it's going to mean more money flowing from Hollywood toward the Democrats.
Well, and that's an interesting point, James, but I want to talk about this also on a very local level for the city of Los Angeles and Hollywood and Beverly Hills as well, because Henry Waxman is retiring from Congress, and he's been a stalwart on Capitol Hill. Now, when you're looking at this race, you just mentioned those big Democratic donors. They're not limited to donations in these individual campaigns. Do you think this is going to have a huge impact on that race?
That race already has, the well-heeled donors in there, but the money will be spread perhaps a little bit wider. I don't know what the latest count is, but there was something like anywhere from 7 to 9 candidates, because whoever gets elected to that seat, it's essentially the equivalent of a lifetime appointment based on the demographics in the district. And so it's a very sought after seat, including new age gurus seeking the seat, people from all walks of life. So it's going to be, it will have an effect. I think it's a marginal one, but still it will.
Well, James, as I'm listening to you talk, I think I hesitate to bring this up on camera, because I'm sitting here thinking you and I may have a chance to do a creative project together, a screen treatment of the sad and apparently sordid saga of State Senator Leland Yee up in Sacramento. And I don't think we're going to we haven't heard a lot of that about that from the national press. Is that having an impact in California politics? Does that help the Republican Party any way at all going into crucial elections there in California?
Well, one thing, it raises awareness about the so-called supermajority. You know, the Democrats lost their supermajority because of Leland Yee's indictment and other Democrats that happened at the same time, which hurt their standing and their number of seats in the Senate. So I think it raises the awareness in a way that other people are going to, in other races in California, bring that up, that it hasn't been such a good thing having too much power in one party's hands, and maybe this corruption is a manifestation of that. I think that's going to be a campaign theme.
Well, James, let's make the move back to a topic we have visited before, as apparently Noah, despite all the buzz, all the criticism, maybe because of it, appeared to have a pretty good box office take since it's been released. Now, it's interesting, a lot of conservative Christian groups here in the United States were upset, but Muslim nations apparently taking the step of banning Noah from theaters in those nations. What is the saga of Noah? Is this going to be a box office success?
Well, there's a huge question mark over Noah, and here's why. There's a market research firm called CinemaScore that essentially polls people on opening night of the movie, and those are the most enthusiastic people. And when a movie gets a CinemaScore of B, the executives in major studios begin to bite their fingernails. They're so nervous. And Noah received a C. And a C is, and this is universally known, even the LA Times said so, a C is a failing grade. Now, Noah received a C because essentially it is an insult to people who take the Bible in any way as a serious sacred document. And secondly, it has a very boring third act that leaves the people with a bad taste in their mouth. If it was titled Norm and it was a fantasy, people would say, well, it's kind of a second-rate Lord of the Rings. But because Paramount marketed this film and baited and switched people with that trailer they had, making people think it was about the biblical Noah, and then people show up and they get this sort of angry, petulant animal rights activist, environmentalist who's a misanthrope and wants to kill humanity. That was too much of a different product than what people expected.
Boy, you mean, so based on this radical revision vision of Noah, you have a situation where we may see eventually a box office disaster of biblical proportions.
When it comes to the profit factor, you know, it needs to probably recoup. You know, Paramount says they spent $130 million roughly for production, and it's probably twice that when you include advertising and marketing. So these future weeks are going to be very critical, and it goes up against the Captain America sequel next weekend. May not.
Gotcha.
Right.
Thanks.
James Hirsen. We probably won't see that on any movie posters. A second-rate Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
From Newsmax's James Hirsen.
Well, we appreciate James' honest assessment as people try to profit off a profit. There's more to come on America's Forum. Stay tuned.
attack by 61%. Lower your bad cholesterol, unclog your arteries naturally, safely lower your blood pressure, and so much more. This easy-to-read book shows you how to make simple changes to protect your heart.
Dr. Crandall's best-selling book is available at bookstores everywhere, or go online to heartcure211.com and get your copy for just $4.95.
Meet John